fourth episode of the Voices of Rondo Youth Council podcast. My name is Erica, and I'm here with my fellow hosts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Moises.
My name is Javier Soto.
So in this episode, we'll be talking about the gentrification in the Rondo neighborhood, as well as in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans. So, like Rondo, Treme is a historically black community that has also been split by an interstate. And within that, we're going to discuss what the neighborhood of Treme is doing to revitalize their community, specifically highlighting a nonprofit founded in 2017, the Claiborne Avenue Alliance, who is fighting to remove that section of the highway, Interstate 10 in Treme, and replace it with the avenue that was once there. So with that, we can move into the content now.
So, what is gentrification?
Well, gentrification is defined as removing living spaces for disenfranchised people. And originally, the term was coined in London in the 1960s. I have no clue by who,
right,
but it's just where it comes from.
So I feel like we've talked a lot about gentrification in this podcast series, and we've really used the word a lot, but just to like really hone in on it and understand what it means, it's like you said, it's when an economically poorer area sees an influx of wealthy people, businesses and companies coming into their neighborhood, buying up land, raising the cost of living, cutting funding from pre-existing opportunities, which all subsequently drives out the original peoples of that community. And so how exactly has gentrification played out in Rondo? Because that's a very real reality. So we're going to show y'all a clip of an interview we did with the mayor of Brooklyn Center, Mayor April Graves. She's from the Rondo community, grew up in the Rondo community, and she's going to tell us how gentrification in her neighborhood has affected her. So let's roll it. Okay, so we just wanted to have a conversation with you talking about the history of Rondo and like where you see it going in the future. So like, if you don't mind, we just wanted to ask you, so where are you from and what does that mean to you?
Well, I grew up in the Rondo community on Laurel and Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
My parents bought that house before I was even born. So I spent, all of my childhood there. And actually, my mom sold that house, I think in 2015, and moved in with me in Brooklyn Center. So my family was there for over 30 years. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because Rondo's gone through a lot of changes. I know about the history of I-94. I wasn't around, obviously, when that happened, but I've definitely seen a lot of changes just while I was growing up there. Selby was definitely kind of a hot spot when I was in high school. I don't know that it necessarily is right now. I haven't been there in that area to know that, but, it was kind of the block, but it also was like a space where I would see a lot of my friends from school. And some of them were friends, some of them were acquaintances, but it still felt like a very vibrant neighborhood, even when there was difficulties. And the thing that I always talk about Rondo, or at least about the area that I grew up in on Laurel, is that it was sort of like at the interpass of like wealth or the haves and the have-nots, because the governor's mansion's right there on Summit. But then I also see so much struggle, so much hardship and inequality and inequity along Selby, along Marshall, and definitely on the other side of 94 and around Eigelhart and Carroll and all those streets as well. But it's still a very connected community. There's lots of places where you can go and you can feel accepted. One of my favorite places to visit is the Golden Time. And I wasn't there when I was young, but I definitely have went back and frequented it in its former location as well as the location it is in now. And so I'd like to see it revitalized. I've seen some revitalization, but there's definitely like apartment buildings that I knew had friends that stayed in that are now like condos, like on Dayton and Marshall. So I know that there's also been some gentrification that's happened over the years as well. And it's interesting to understand or to think about and try to understand the connections between Rondo and the Frogtown area, which both are like very ethnically diverse. And I've always felt like, how is it that Frogtown has been so able to thrive and have all of these, Hmong-owned businesses, and yet it's been more of a struggle to get back the Black businesses in Rondo that were there before I was born. And that seems like it's been a much slower process to try to support that coming back and being more of a vibrant part of the city. But there's still Rondo days. There used to be Selby days when I was younger as well. But I don't think that that's happened for many, many years.
Yeah, and like speaking of the revitalization of Rondo that you're talking about, what does that look like to you?
Well, I mean, being that I'm a mayor in Brooklyn Center now, I guess right away I would think about how do you support small businesses and entrepreneurs, Black small businesses and entrepreneurs specifically, to have a foothold in that community. And also, I know there's been some conversations around, the land bridge over 94. There's even some conversations around like turning 94 into something that isn't an interstate highway. I think at this point in time, that might be a little bit unrealistic to try to like turn an interstate into something other than an interstate, especially if you think about the importance of having access to businesses, which is part of how you revitalize an area so that people can come and spend their money there and then the money will be in the community. But I definitely think it's around home ownership, getting people that have had roots there and access to being able to buy homes. A lot of the reason why I'm in Brooklyn Center is because I couldn't afford to buy a home in my home area in Rondo. I was able to afford a place in Brooklyn Center that I couldn't have afforded in St. Paul in the Rondo neighborhood.
That was April Graves, the mayor of Brooklyn Center. What did you guys think about what she had to say?
Yeah, that one line about her saying that she couldn't afford a home in St. Paul and she just had to go, outside the city to Brooklyn Center to get a home. That's how you slowly get rid of a community.
That's just crazy how like in her own community, that's where she's from, that's where she grew up, and that's where all her memories are from her formative years of like, that's just crazy how she couldn't even afford to stay there. Like that's not right.
And I wonder how many more people that's happened to.
Right. That's not
she
like
was the only one.
That's not an isolated event. Like this is the reality for so many people who are from Rondo and have roots in Rondo.
And kind of to tie in, she talked about gentrification in Rondo, and I was a product of that, her not being able to buy a home. But it's happening today.
Yeah, it's happening real close too. Especially in comparison to where we are like right now.
Yeah.
Down the street, I think on Lexington, there are these apartments that are going up. They're luxury apartments. They're called the Aladdis, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I think half of it is supposed to be luxury, and then the other half is supposed to be affordable housing. Is that right?
It's like mixed. Something like that.
Yeah. Maybe that's wrong. That could be not true.
No, I actually did read something about that where it's like some sections will be affordable, but it's mostly known as being all these luxury apartments getting built up.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that like affordable in like St. Paul, like affordable, or affordable as in Rondo affordable?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think affordable housing in St. Paul is like what? 40,000, something, yep. And then Rondo is like literally half of that,
like 20,000.
Exactly.
20,000.
I'm glad you brought that up. Like exactly, like when we're like brainstorming ways to create like actual real affordable housing in Rondo, you can't look at the entirety of St. Paul because, like you said, like the area median income in Rondo is half that of St. Paul's. So you can't look at the entirety of that because economically they're two different playing fields.
Yeah, and one thing to mention, and this has to be mentioned, with those apartments, the city council. They didn't support it, right? They struck it down. But then, Mayor Carter vetoed their decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's how they're being built right now. Which is interesting, isn't it?
I just think it's really not okay how like one person can have so much power to just like undermine something that a whole entire group of people decided. That's just too much power, honestly.
That kind of makes me worried for the future of Reconnect Rondo as a whole.
Exactly.
Just like the land bridge and stuff, because I mean the plans are obviously like a huge part of that is affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's supposed to go on that land, at least part of it. But if like that doesn't really matter to the mayor, like he could just put what he wants on there.
Right. Let's discuss that a bit more. So, they built this land bridge, right? That's pretty much, as soon as that land bridge is built, that's pretty much when Reconnect Rondo's actual job ends. Yeah. And then that's when the city steps in, right? Because, Reconnect Rondo, they don't control that land. That's the city.
Right.
So we need to remind ourselves that, like, you know, Reading Rondo was built or was founded as a community organization. You know, Rondo elders who lived through I-94 being put through their neighborhood.
Yeah.
They founded it. And, you know, they have values of building affordable housing without gentrification.
Right.
You know, it's in there, right?
Displacement. Right.
That's the vision, right?
Right.
But the actual, like, result could be different because of the city. And we've seen signs of that, as we just said.
So in 2019, Macalester College, in partnership with Reconnect Rondo, conducted a study of gentrification in Rondo and offered several different strategies to avoid displacement and offer affordable housing in Rondo if and or when the land bridge is built. So would you like to...
So some of them is ground lease, where pretty much a lease agreement where the city still owns the land, but a household will pretty much rent it for pretty much decades. And that creates, you know, some stability and affordability, which is important. And then there's a new term, which I didn't even know existed, inclusionary zoning, where pretty much you have affordable housing and market rate housing in the same zone. So, you know, there's not different zones with different incomes.
So you're making like a mixed income neighborhood.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Another one of those strategies is to restrict use after sale. So that's when the city uses restrictive covenants to make it so that a property can only be sold at a certain price and can be occupied by low income families. And like many of you may know, that restrictive covenants have been historically used to prevent various BIPOC folk from buying houses in certain areas, but they can also be used in our favor too. And another one too is the government can offer local government rent subsidies to help folks pay their rent. But I'm happy too, Javi, that you mentioned, like, how do we define affordable housing? Like, is Reconnect Rondo's definition of affordable housing actually affordable to the original community members of Rondo and those that are still here and those that had to move away but plan to move back? Like, is it actually affordable to them? So that's something we really have to be looking at.
Yep, and that's something that the city needs to look at, and Reconnect Rondo needs to, you know, really tune in on that and really advocate for that, because it can't be based on St. Paul.
Right.
So I think this brings us to the city we'll talk about today, Treme. It's one of the communities that were in the Bloomberg article that we covered. So Treme is, you know, they dubbed it the first African-American community. You know, one thing in my research about it that I found remarkable is that 80% of African-Americans own property
really?
Before the highway came through.
That's amazing.
So that's a lot.
Wow.
And it was, you know, that changed when the highway came through. So
yeah, I mean, Treme was originally like similarly to Rondo, it was just like a hotspot for food, culture, you know, music, all of that stuff, all of the above.
Creole food.
Yeah, specifically.
That's where, you know, some say jazz was founded. You know, in the New Orleans area.
So much culture.
Yep, home to the, I'm pretty sure it's the National Jazz Museum. And yeah, a lot of famous figures called Treme home.
Louis Armstrong too.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong. I think
Homer Plessy.
Right.
That was when you know, Plessy v. Ferguson covered that. Which I didn't know. He was from Treme.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
I think he moved there later in his life. I don't think he was from there originally.
But I think that's where the case happened.
Yeah.
So
okay,
that's amazing.
So earlier I talked about a nonprofit out of Treme called the Claiborne Avenue Alliance. So they are advocating to remove the section of I-10 that is in Treme and replace it with the avenue that was once there, which was Claiborne Avenue. And so we're going to show y'all a clip of an interview we did with the co-founder of the Claiborne Avenue Alliance, telling us what Treme was like before the building of I-10.
So when you speak of reclaiming the beauty and, you know, those beautiful oak trees that line the boulevard, what was Treme and the 7th Ward like before the Claiborne Expressway came through?
Well, Treme, actually there are two sections. So there's what I call the historic core, which is the original Treme neighborhood that was found in the early 1700s. And then there is my part of Treme, which was suburban at the time.
Right.
You know, in the historic core, the buildings are very close together. There's 5 feet between buildings. I live in a huge 2-story house with a very wide lot. So it was really suburbia at its time, but now that's all considered Treme. So it has two very distinct sections known for jazz primarily.
Right.
We have a lot of jazz artists who live here. Trombone Shorty is probably the most famous contemporary artist, but one artist that people probably don't associate with New Orleans, and he's before my time, but I've heard of him, is Louis Prima. So back in the day, way back in the Wayback Machine, what I call the suburban part of Treme was primarily Sicilian. And then it eventually changed to Black.
Right.
So my family bought from Sicilians, a Sicilian family, and the Sicilian musicians lived on my side. So Louis Prima lived on my side of Claiborne. And then the Black and Creole primarily, musicians lived on the riverside, what we call. So that's the dynamic of Treme. So there's still a lot of music here. Seventh Ward was known more for the craftsmen, the finished carpenters, the bricklayers, all of the trades. When you look at New Orleans architecture and you look at what makes it beautiful, those craftsmen primarily lived in the Seventh Ward. So you had the building arts and then you had music. So
right.
Both neighborhoods collectively fueled the creative class in New Orleans, which has been here since its inception.
Wow. And you mentioned, and by the way, when you say that, like, it was mostly Sicilian.
Yes.
We've seen that in other places. We've seen that in Rondo and Detroit, where these BIPOC communities, they used to be like immigrant communities before the Great Migration and all that. So that's awesome. So that was a clip of the Amy Stelly interview, talk about how it was before the highway came through. Just to add on that, there was 120 homes that were there that were just demolished by when the highway came. And Erica, you have a point about like how the demographics changed due to gentrification.
Yeah, so gentrification in Treme, it's just like in Rondo, it's a very real reality. And like, especially since that highway has come through, it's made it especially vulnerable to it. And so I was looking at, just looking at the effects of gentrification in Treme. I was looking at different census data and like the racial demographics of that neighborhood. And so I'm going to be specifically talking about the Black and white population, since that's what makes up most of Treme. So in 2010, the Black population of Treme was about like 90%, and the white population was about 5%. And so move forward only like 10 years into the future, into 2020, now the Black population is about 56% and the white population is about 36%. So that's like a huge decrease in Black population and huge increase in white population. And,
the reason for that is because, after Hurricane Katrina, that community became vulnerable. Many people left, didn't return. And, these companies, these short-term rental property owners started buying up all these houses and making it into short-term rentals, which are pretty much like Airbnbs, just to think about it. And increased like tenfold. It was like 1,500 in 2014.
Wow.
And now it's like 6,000, something like that. And like 400 are in Treme. Dang. And it was so bad that the city council of New Orleans just put a cap on it. It's like, nope, no more.
Dang. And just think back to when you said before the highway, 80% of the Black residents of Treme owned a home. Yep. Like, that's crazy.
It's a lot. It's a lot of change just with the highway and the hurricane.
Right.
Displaced so many people. With that, there's, the Claiborne Avenue Alliance, which advocates for turning the I-10 highway into an avenue that was there before. So it would be a 100-foot median, which will make way for the trees that used to be there. Obviously, it won't be the same, but people will plant trees and have new businesses and all that. And importantly, affordable housing to combat the gentrification that's been happening.
And like I think too, like just like thinking about the effects of what that would do, like what would it do to turn part of this interstate into an avenue? So I think that there was like studies shown that like it would only increase like the travel time on the rest of the highway
by 2 minutes,
by like 2 to 6 minutes. And like especially when you think about like what that would be doing for the community of Treme, like that's not a very expensive price to pay at all.
No, I wouldn't think so.
No.
You know, the price tag for a Reconnect Rondo is not that much. So
here's another clip from Amy Stelly discussing gentrification. And to be honest, she could probably put it better than any of us could.
Yep, definitely.
On the topic of gentrification, how does gentrification take root in a community?
Let's take short-term rentals, for instance. So, as I said, property owners who had rental properties sat on them, and they either converted them to short-term rentals when the short-term rental market started to get hot, right? But those who wanted to sell realized that they could sell for a huge profit. So folks, I'll take the house across the street from me. At one time, it listed for $70,000 and the owner wouldn't sell. He wouldn't sell to anybody. And then the market opened up with short-term rentals and he could sell it for $200,000. So he did. And he didn't do anything. Now, in New Orleans, $200,000 is a lot of money because folks who are in the who work in the tourist and the hospitality sector, some of them earn minimum wage. They can't afford a $200,000 house. The short-term rental market exploded here. And now that $200,000 house is worth $450,000. A hospitality worker can't buy that. So the people that I grew up with who lived in that house across the street could not afford to come back to the house where they lived for years and years and years and years. So the folks who buy these properties now have cash, and they are mostly people who are moving to New Orleans because folks who are here, who are still here, if they don't own a home and they're working a minimum wage job, they can't buy a home. So gentrification is taking hold because the market is for people who can afford to make cash purchases in a lot of places, but they're liquid, right? They can get a mortgage. And we know this is a red line neighborhood still, right? So getting a mortgage here, if you don't come with a lot of cash, if you're Black, it's going to be difficult for you to get a $450,000 mortgage to move in a house that used to be a short-term rental. So the market here is really dynamic in that way. It's cooling up a bit because we are trying to curb the short-term rental market. That's what's driving gentrification now, I can tell you. So we're trying to curb it a little bit, but the property values are not dropping quickly. So folks who are coming in with cash don't look like me.
So as we're nearing the end of our episode, I just want to just ask the question of like, what are the different connections that you can draw between Treme and Rondo?
Yeah, there's this big connection of, Rondo, there's a northern route. We all know that it was like a route that didn't really do much, didn't displace anybody. Right. But instead, it just went with the route that went straight through community.
Yeah.
Right.
You're talking about Pierce Butler, right?
Yeah. In Treme, there's two highways that we're going to go through, right? One highway was going to go through Treme. Another highway was going to go through the French Quarter, which is a mostly white community. Mm-hmm. The people in French Quarter rightfully said no to it, right? They, lobbied against it, protested against it, and they got it canceled. Mm-hmm. But in Treme, they did the same thing, still went through.
So they respected the voices of the French Quarter, but not the voices of Treme at all. Nope. Wow.
That's a parallel I can distinguish because two routes. The one went through community of color.
Right. The French Quarter had the money and the political power to say like, no, we don't want this in our community, and then the government respected that.
Right. Rightfully so, right? You don't want a highway through your community that you lived there for many years. But Treme didn't.
It's very interesting how like the government's like, what are you talking about? This is a good thing. Like, this is great for your neighborhood. But then like the French Quarter, they're like, no, we don't want this in our community. So it's almost like they know it's going to negatively impact neighborhoods. So...
And as you see, in French Quarter, they're doing great now. You see photos of it and videos of like the parades going through there.
Right.
A bunch of culture.
I've seen
They're doing fine.
Mm-hmm.
So we see, I wonder what they would have been like if the proposed highway did go through.
Wow.
Alternate universe. Get to explore.
I was going to bring up mostly the fact that I feel like that shouldn't even be a political issue. Like, I'm just kind of referring to the fact that you said political power. Mm-hmm. These people had political power. And the only real power they had is that they were white. That was their power.
Right.
That was their political power.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it shouldn't have been a political issue.
No.
It shouldn't be.
Nope, not at all.
It's about people's homes and businesses and
people's lives and their community and their
It's less of a parallel, I guess, and more just an observation.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Voices of Rondo podcast. On the next episode, we'll be going over MnDOT's possible reimagining for I-94, as well as community thoughts and concerns on possible gentrification of the land bridge, as well as Houston and Miami. You can find us on our website, our YouTube page, wherever else you find us.
Yep. We're out there.
Yeah, go find us.
www.reconnectrondo.com.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching our podcast. If you like what you see, give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and click that notification bell to get notified when we put out new podcast episodes.